Welcome to the Gauteng Subsidized Bus Contracts Tender Tutorial. This video is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport. This is not a tendering process, but information sharing for tenders that are to be advertised on the National Treasury website, specifically the Tender Bulletin. This audio-visual clip communicates the process of implementation for subsidized tendered bus contracts, specifically for Gauteng commuters. It is a tutorial that prepares prospective bidders to be aware of tenders that are to be released in line with Section 42 of the National Land Transport Act. The Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport administers subsidized bus service contracts, both intra- and inter-provincial. An executive decision was made to put out all subsidized service contracts out to a tender process. The Gauteng province is to act as a contracting authority for intergovernmental authorization agreements. This service is provided in alignment with government's affordability with intent to improve service quality.
As a Department of Roads and Transport, we are advertising these new contracts because in their current form, these contracts are outdated. They were last advertised more than 20 years ago, which then means that we've been extending these contracts on a month-to-month basis, which then makes the contract very expensive. You must remember that the whole intention of subsidized public transport is to make sure that we lessen the cost to the taxpayer and also to the commuter. The contractors themselves, they complain about the fleets that they have. It's becoming old because they themselves can no longer afford to run these contracts. And also, if you look at the changes that have happened over the past 20 years, it tells you that we need to review these contracts and bring in contracts that will be responsive to the current needs of the commuters. And it's also important to also state that when you look at the consumer price index, these contracts are way off. They're just not making sense, and they make it very difficult for the commuter as well. You would know we have many accidents resulting from the fact that if the contractor himself is not finding it easy to maintain his fleet because the contract is not sustainable for him, then it means that you will see problems with the fleet, the age of the fleet, the maintenance of the fleet. So we're trying to ensure that we bring in new contracts that will make it safe but also very affordable to commute in Gauteng. The current economic environment in the country is at a very precarious position. So one, we want to make sure that we use these contracts, one, to stimulate growth in the province. How do you do that? You do that by making sure that you make the contract as inclusive as possible and also open it up for women companies, women-owned companies, youth-owned companies, and companies that are owned by people with disabilities. So our contribution towards the contract ensures that the commuter doesn't take the blow when they have to use public transport, and make sure that these contracts make it cheap and safe for the commuter to use public transport. So we are targeting groups such as small and medium enterprises. We're targeting the taxi industry, women-owned companies, companies that are owned by youth, and companies that are owned by people with disabilities. We are expecting the advert to be up in September, from September onwards. They will be on platforms that we normally use, which are newspapers and the Treasury website. Entities that are eligible to put in their bids are entities such as the current operators who are in the system at the moment. We are looking at SMMEs, new entrants as well, and also we're looking at general public transport operators in the province.
Section 14. Provinces and planning authorities must take steps as soon as possible after the date of commencement of the National Land Transport Act to integrate services subject to contracts in their areas, as well as appropriate uncontracted services into the larger public transport system in of relevant integrated transport plans. Subsidized Services Contracts. Section 42.1. The contracting authorities must take steps within the prescribed period and in the prescribed manner before expiry of contracts contemplated in subsections 2A, B or C to put arrangements in place for the services to be put out to tender so that the service can continue without interruption. Full copy of the NLTA 5 of 2009 can be found at www.gov.za. Prerequisite number 1. Traceable records to rectify operators' track records in the public transport services is integral to this bid. In order to establish the ability of the bidder to acquire the requisite numbers and quality of vehicles to operate the contracted network, this must be clearly demonstrated. The bidder must prove access to a depot facility. All prospective bidders are requested to provide an appropriate service and maintenance agreement to guarantee high levels of service reliability. The bidder must also prove his or her ability to acquire the required minimum square capacity for the operated fleet. Prerequisite number 2. The threshold to qualify Stage 3 is 80 to 100 points. The bids will be subjected to evaluation criteria contained in the bid documents, where the bidder would need to obtain a minimum of 80 points. The department will invite prospective operators to a review panel at which the operators are expected to deliver a presentation relating to their bid submission. The review panel needs to be convinced about the authenticity of your submission. Pricing includes all taxes. The 90-10 preference points system applies to contract value that exceeds 50 million rand inclusive of all taxes. This means 90% on price and 10% on triple BEE rating. 80-20 preference points system apply to a contract value of up to 50 million rand inclusive of all taxes. Original certified triple BEE certificate are required for the bidding entity. SARS tax compliance status pin of the bidding entity or of each partner of the bidding entity must be submitted. Bidding entity registration documents on Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, High Court, or a letter of intent from a company, trust, cooperative or trading entity. Original certified ID not older than 3 months of all directors or trustees of the bidding entity must be submitted, including banking details. The bidding entity or each member of the bidding entity must be registered on Central Supplier Database, www.csd.gov.za. Submit proof of registration. All appropriate tender forms, schedules, and certificates must be properly completed, signed and witnessed where indicated, in black ink and submitted with the other tender documents as part of the tender bid. Every page of the tender form must be signed, and every page other government forms submitted must be initialed by or on behalf of the bidder. All persons that are signatories must be duly authorized. tender's address to be completed on the form for the delivery of a tender. Confirmation of attendance of the tender briefing clarification meeting. Bidder to complete form with tender price in words, undertaking and validity period. Form 4, SARS tax compliance status. Bidders to provide tax compliance status PIN from South African Revenue Service to enable to confirm tender's tax compliance status online via e-filing SARS tax compliance status PIN. A tender submitted by a company, close corporation, or other legal person must be accompanied by a resolution or agreement of the directors or members must be compliant to the requirement of Form 5 of the tender. A tender submitted by a partnership or consortium of 2 or more parties must be accompanied by a signed memorandum of understanding between the parties defined by the conditions under which the partnership or consortium will function with delivery timelines signed by the persons authorized to represent the entity. This form must be completed to confirm non-collusion by bidder. This form must be completed by all members of the consortium or partnership. This form must not only be completed by bidders, but also certified by a commissioner of oaths. On this form, a complete schedule of existing public transport services operated by the bidder must be clearly laid out. This form must indicate all the latest unexpired registered, licensed and roadworthy vehicles that will be used as per the requirements of the National Road Transport Act 93 of 1996. At this stage in the process, the operator must only supply details of vehicles that are intended for use on this contract. Certificates of homologation and refurbishments for all vehicle types to be used during the contract period must be attached to this form. Pricing on this form must be in the currency of the Republic of South Africa. It should be noted that the tender amount is only relevant for purposes of tender evaluation and determining whether the contracting authority will have adequate funds to cover the contract payments. It will not necessarily reflect the actual amount payable to the successful bidder for this contract. Bidders should also note that the estimated consolidated travel distances of all vehicles indicated in kilometers are only estimates and will not necessarily be the travel distances covered over the contract period. This form enables the bidder to claim establishment costs. All sections of the form must be completed. This form provides details of all operating licenses and permits held as required by the National Land Transport Act. Photocopies of the licenses and permits must be attached. This form requires the organizational diagram proposed to be established by the bidder to manage the contract. This form requires all names of human resources with a clear indication of all full-time or part-time staff. In this form, the bidder is advised of the minimum wage requirements in accordance with the latest agreements of the South African Road Passenger Bargaining Council. This is laid out in Clause 28 of the tender document. The information provided on this form must correspond with the information provided in Tables 2A, 2B, and 2C on Form 12. In this form, the bidder needs to indicate, for example, that an administration, number of drivers, or mechanics, etc., will be used to realize the expected outcomes of this tender. This bidder needs to refer to Clause 5 of Regulation 5 of the National Land Transport Act, accessible at www.gov.za. The requirements of this form are: firstly, the ring fencing of financials for this contract. Secondly, the bidder's liability to pay income tax. And thirdly, a declaration of any cross-subsidizing operations or contracts. This form must be signed by the person authorized as a signatory in Form 1. The bidder needs to once again refer to Clause 5 of Regulation 5 of the National Land Transport Act, accessible at www.gov.za. In this form, the bidder must declare all funding sources of existing contracts and this potential contract. A declaration by each director or member of the bidding entity must be attached. Bidders are urged to submit their tender documents with the signed declaration of interest. The variable cost component is linked to the number of scheduled revenue kilometers to be operated by each of the vehicle types on the contract. A variable contract rate, price per kilometer, is therefore calculated per vehicle type. Variable costs consist of the following elements: fuel, diesel and petrol, tires, maintenance and spares, and oil and lubricants. The fixed cost component will be linked to the number of vehicles of each vehicle type operated on the contract. A fixed contract rate, a rate per vehicle, is therefore calculated per vehicle type. Fixed costs consist of the following elements: labor, wages and cost of drivers, management, the administration department, and the traffic and engineering departments of the operator's organization. Vehicle-related costs, installments, vehicle insurance, license fees and operating licenses, and permits, and other general overhead costs. The charge as specified in the tender bulletin will be levied on collection of documents. The tender validity and binding period is calculated from the time the tender closes. The contracting authority may extend the period for which the tender is to remain valid. This can be a further 30 days on written notice to the bidder. These documents must be submitted. Valid SARS tax compliance status PIN. In the case of consortium or joint venture, each party to submit tax compliance status PIN Form STI 5.1, Application for Tax Clearance Certificate available from SARS, duly completed and signed undertaking or declaration or certificates, Declaration of Financial Support by owner, completion of affidavit in Form 9 of Volume 3, Previous Convictions, and Verification Certificate, Triple BEE status. Services required to be provided for this contract might differ from existing or former services provided in the service area. The operator must inform and fully satisfy the nature and extent of the services and conditions being contracted. This may include, but not limited to, a weekly comparison of kilometers traveled and a renegotiation of contracted rates to consider any variations to the kilometers traveled. It is the duty of the bidder to validate the accuracy and sufficiency of the tender and rates set out in Form 12 of the tender forms. Value-added tax is only payable by the operator on items such as tires and lubricants. This breakdown must be visible on the rates supplied. The bidder must make allowance for changes in distance traveled. The bidder must forecast any additional labor force requirements. See Clause 3 of the Conditions of Contract. Bidders are permitted to tender for 2 or more contracts, and for each combination, a separate tender must be submitted in accordance with Form 12 of the tender forms. Conditions under which a tender may be rejected: failure to conform to tender rules and instructions in tender notice, committed any act stipulated in Clause 47.3 D to I of the Conditions of Contract. Restrictions may be imposed upon any person, firm or corporation. Contracting authority can consider decisions of any departmental procurement about restrictions of a tenderer in the evaluation, etc. The successful bidder will be awarded contracting services for 7 years. The contracted operator is required to act as an independent contractor and not as an employee or agent of the contracting authority. Contracting authority is not liable to pay out any retrenchments or severance benefits to any of the employees of the contracted operator on dismissal or on expiry of the contract period. The contracting operator is required to obtain contracting authority approval if it wants to change ownership control. If an approval is granted for change of ownership control, the operator must provide the contracting authority within 7 days with particulars of any such change as shown in Form 22. The contracting authority will impose a penalty in instances where operator fails to do so. Contracting authority will provide all data and statistics concerning existing or former services. Further, the contracting authority affirms that such is provided in good faith and is the best information available to the contracting authority at the relevant time. 6 months after commencement date of the tender being awarded, the contracting authority must arrange a meeting with the operator to compare the scheduled weekly kilometers provided by the contracting authority during the tender process to the actual scheduled weekly kilometers. Parties must renegotiate the contract if there is a deviation of more than 10%. The operator must submit all applicable information and data as may be required of the contract documents. Any explanation desired by the operator regarding the meaning of the interpretation of this contract must be requested in writing from the contracting authority. Contracting authority must respond within 7 days in writing only. The operator must retain all information and records pertaining to this contract and keep it available to the contracting authority for inspection for the duration of this contract and for at least 3 years after the expiry or termination of this contract. The operator must satisfy itself as to the correctness and sufficiency of the contract rates. The calculation of contract rates must cover full compensation for all general preliminaries and expenses incurred in complying with the conditions and specifications, including any other costs, as well as everything else necessary for the execution of this contract. The operator must make allowance in the contract rates for all costs in connection with the preparation and furnishing of any information that may be required by the contracting authority as contemplated in clauses 6.1. The operator is made aware of the fact that services may be varied during the contract period under clause 16, which could lead to an increase or decrease of monthly scheduled kilometers. The operator is advised that the services may have been rationalized and that routes, timetables, etc. may not necessarily be the same as those operated previously, etc. The contracting authority or its authorized agents may inspect the operator's premises and facilities, including workshops and depots, as well as vehicles by means of which the operator provides or proposes to provide the services at any reasonable time. Chartered accountants or consultants appointed by the contract authority may report on the operator's financial resources or any operational aspects anytime during the contract period. The operator is required to provide assistance in case such an investigation is instituted. The contract authority may require the operator's passengers' revenue and cash handling procedures to be audited. The contracting authority shall determine routes, trips, fares and timetables of the services, determine the operating times, prescribe other terms, conditions or operational rules deemed necessary for the provision of the services, provide instructions and directions to the operator. In its sole and absolute discretion, amend the schedules, routes or timetable in the case of an emergency, and amend the services where financial or budgetary restrictions demanded or the occurrence of unforeseen events beyond the reasonable control of the contracting authority. The operator is required to submit the contract management plan, business plan, operational reports, and other information set out in Schedule 5, and must assist the service monitoring firm to provide the reports and other information set out in Schedule 6. The operator must at all times comply with good governance principles and other applicable legislation regarding good governance, business plans, records, and reporting. The operator must operate those services in accordance with the routes, vehicles, timetables, and fare timetables set out in that schedule, and any other conditions set out in this contract, and not make any change to the service without obtaining the prior written approval of the contracting authority. This in compliance to clause 16, except in the case of emergency or another event contemplated in clause 15. The contracting authority is responsible for development and planning services in accordance with its obligations in terms of the Act. The contracting authority may also prescribe minimum service levels and assess performance. The authority may intervene as per Clause 16. The contracting authority may, after consulting the operator, issue protocol and standard operating procedures from time to time, indicating how the services are to be provided. The operator accepts that the routes assigned to it in the specification may not always be for its exclusive use and may also be used by other public transport operators, as directed or decided by the contracting authority. If the introduction of a new operator adversely affects the income of the operator, the parties may negotiate additional compensation for the operator. The operator must exercise the highest level of skill, care, and diligence in the provision of the services and operate the service strictly in accordance with the specification as well as other relevant provision of this contract to the satisfaction of the contracting authority. The operator must provide for each trip a vehicle having the passenger capacity as specified in the definition of minibus, midibus, standard bus, double-deck bus, and/or bus train, as the case may be. The operator must obtain and maintain, enforce all operating licenses or permits, including licenses and permits required by local authorities, pay all fees and levies, and issue all notices as may be necessary. The contracting authority will formulate a proposed timeline to be applied during the contracting period. Due to possible changing circumstances, variations to the timetable may be necessary before commencement of the services. If this is the case, the parties must agree on appropriate timetables at least 15 business days before the commencement date. If this is not done, the timetables in Schedule 8, as at the date of signing this contract, shall be operated on the commencement date until further notice from the contracting authority, etc. Such timetables will be binding and can be obtained in the tender documents to be published on the National Treasury website, www.treasury.gov.za. Subject to Clause 13, the operator must submit a document to the contracting authority containing all the duties and timetables to be operated for each category of operating day and vehicle on a weekly basis, not later than 8 o'clock each Wednesday morning. No changes may be effected to the duty numbers without a 7-day prior written notification to the representative and passengers. This is set out in the conditions under which the operator is allowed or not allowed to cancel scheduled trips and the procedures to follow when requesting the cancellation of these scheduled trips. Operator is required to comply with the services set out in the specification in Schedule 8 in regards to the routes, timetables, vehicles, and fare structures. Conditions and procedures are provided in which the contracting authority or representative may, after consultation with the operator, make variations to the services within the service areas, as well as which variations are permitted. Variations may be undertaken for the following reasons: to increase or decrease the number of scheduled trips on any route or routes, to omit any route or add a new route, to lengthen, shorten, or alter an existing route, where alter means to change the route without necessarily increasing or decreasing the kilometer length thereof, to alter the number or location of authorized stops in consultation with the relevant local authority and/or traffic authority where applicable, to change the timetable of any portion of the services, and to make alterations in connection with the vehicle capacity as contemplated in Clause 16.3. Written consent by the contracting authority is required for the operator to cede rights or delegate its obligation under this contract or any part thereof. The contracting authority may regard a contravention of the subclause as a material breach of contract, justifying termination thereof in terms of Clause 48. The operator may not subcontract any of its obligation or rights in terms of this contract, in addition to the services which the operator is obligated to provide in terms of this contract. It may, with the prior approval of the contracting authority, operate any other passenger transport service with vehicles owned by the operator and specified for use in this contract, provided that A. The operation of such service does not in any way interfere with the full and complete performance by the operator of its obligations under this contract. B. The additional services do not operate in competition with the services specified in this contract. And C. The operator will compensate the contracting authority in an amount to be agreed upon and deducted from relevant monthly claim or claims to compensate for the fact that the subsidy paid under the contract partially covers vehicle costs. This invitation was brought to you by the compliments of the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport. Model tender contract documents can be downloaded at https://archive.opengazettes.org.za/2013-vol-576-NO-36520-dated-2013-06-05.pdf. Thank you.